Hey class, welcome to week 6, and I just made a whole video which I didn't have my microphone on, so that messed up everything. So we'll start all over. In any case, I know you guys just covered a lot of information on, we did World War I, World War II, and the beginnings of the Cold War. Well, we're really covering the Cold War quite well, and this is so important for understanding so many things and why the modern world is what it is now. And I will talk about this more when we eventually cover the modern Middle East, that I always argue that radical, political, jihadi Islam is really the Frankenstein monster of Cold War policies. This is all, like almost everything that we're seeing now is kind of a result, a blowback, as the term has been used, of the world in which we're learning about right now. Okay? And we're also going to see eventually how the problems of the Cold War, when communism basically falls apart, it doesn't really solve the problems that people thought it would, that many thinkers thought it would. So one of the things that I just want to say is I want to keep in mind while you're watching this is that there's a myth that the Cold War was the free world versus totalitarianism, or versus, that it was democracy versus communism. That you will learn in this lesson that's a full lie. That's empirically false. And the reason is because many dictatorships, not just dictatorships, but many horrible methods were used to combat communism. Now, communists did many horrible things as well. But what I'm pointing out is that if you've had this overly simplistic view of how the world worked during the Cold War, you wouldn't be alone, but it's just not correct. And this is what I had to argue. Many college students become radicalized, like learning this information that you're reading, because if you go to public schools, you get that oversimplified version of what the U.S. and the West has stood for, opposed to the tyrannies of the communist world. And then when you study this, you see that was false. But now here's the other side of it. Then if you study the communist regimes quite well, you see that there's a lot of problems there also. And so the bottom line is this will help you understand not just this history, but some of the results that take place even now socially over even learning about this history. Okay? I just want to say also a few things too. So now many of you have family that fought in the Vietnam War. This will also, there was this trend to kind of make it like, well, nobody really understood. Why were we there? No, there was a very clear ideological reason. Okay, even though the Vietnamese didn't actually attack us and were not actually aiming themselves at an attack on the United States. What I argue is that communism was like a closed artery in the bloodstream of a capitalist world view. Okay? Because think about it. When a country nationalizes all of their industries and so the state takes over natural resources, industry, and it gets to use all that labor, those workers, those resources are cut off from the private sector, okay, of the global markets, right? Now, if you look at China now is relatively, the West and the U.S. still have issues with China and they still butt heads, but we have diplomatic relations. Everything that you see is made in China. The West got more friendly and worked with China, not when they changed their human rights record, or not when they brought more freedom into their political system in terms of a more democratic set of institutions. It's when they changed their economic policies and opened up their markets. See what I'm saying? Vietnam's in the same boat right now. The Vietnamese Communist Party, like the Chinese Communist Party, are authoritarian parties that allow businesses now to come in and tap into that cheap labor and that stable labor, right? Because are workers allowed to protest there? No. So if Nike sends a factory into China, they know that they're going to have a relatively stable time there. Like the workers are not going to revolt. They're going to have low wages. And what China does is the state then kind of has the last say, though. In a sense, it's kind of more like how the fascist regime would have wanted it, which is an ultranationalist state that actually allows capitalism, but the state has the last say, or a strongman in particular. And China's actually becoming more so that way, and simultaneously has still been even more so integrated into the global economy. So this is just something for you to think about. Now, I have a theory on also what just happened with Donald Trump and the situation with North Korea. Now, this part is my theory, but it's just something I want you to think about. And I want you to see how you study this history will help you kind of think more about what to make of what's going on now. You know, when South Korea was making peace with North Korea during the presidency of George Bush Jr., right in the middle of the peace talks, he gave the evil access speech, and he basically talked about North Korea being evil. And I met a Korean exchange student who said he was very confused. Why would the U.S. president try to talk about vilifying North Korea at a time when the South was actually trying to make peace with them? And, you know, I have this theory that if you look, the U.S. has thousands of troops in Japan still, thousands of bases in South Korea. And under Obama, he actually increased U.S. presence in parts of, I believe, Australia and some of the waters down there, kind of in areas that were not really talked about or thought about much. Much of this is supposedly, officially, you know, to protect our allies if they're attacked by North Korea. If North Korea falls apart or makes peace, then it weakens the only reason why you could have U.S. troops in South Korea and Japan is to say that they're there because of China. It becomes a much more an official act of aggression. It's diplomatically very complicated to justify that. And so my thought has been is that the U.S. foreign policy establishment has tried to help keep North Korea a kind of agitated pariah state, but contained nonetheless. And I think that what Trump was possibly thinking in terms of what, you know, as a businessman, like what China wants, is to transform North Korea into an authoritarian capitalist state like China is, which then would open up those controlled Koreans to the markets. It wouldn't change the system of human rights or freedom. It would just, again, switch things over into a capitalist-friendly environment. And that's just, I'm not the only one that has that theory, but that's part of what I think. And so, I don't know, you know, it's a complex world we live in. And we're seeing right now that during the Cold War, there was this idea that freedom and capitalism are what had to come. Actually, that would be the ultimate way that humans could exist. But what we're seeing is a trend in the world of strongman regimes where capitalism is thriving, where there's a taking away of personal freedoms, individual rights. There's surveillance cameras everywhere. And this is something that I think that we should all kind of think about and contemplate. And it kind of should knock us off from this whole left-right polarity and just kind of say to ourselves, well, what do we make of a world right now where authoritarian capitalism is seeming to work well and democratic systems are struggling and having a lot of crisis of many things? There's just something to think about. So I'm going to end it there, and we'll be in touch as needed.